All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time, well, we're looking at something pretty wild, right? The NFL on Christmas Day on Netflix.
Yeah, that was pretty groundbreaking stuff.
Seriously, we've got articles here covering it all, the games, of course, that Beyoncé halftime show. Oh, and even some behind the scenes looks at how the whole, the streaming thing actually worked out.
I mean, you got to admit, it's a landmark moment in broadcasting. I mean, NFL games,
Right.
but exclusively on Netflix,
Yeah.
globally, in different languages.
It's crazy. Plus, games on a Wednesday, that's not your typical football night.
Not at all. That Netflix deal really, I mean, it shook things up.
Big time. But, we got to talk about the elephant in the room. Remember all those issues Netflix had with that Mike Tyson fight?
Oh, yeah, the Jake Paul one.
Right. So there's like a ton of pressure on them to, make sure the streaming thing went smoothly.
Especially since this is like their first time with live NFL games. Part of that 3-year deal they signed,
It's
right?
a huge test for them.
And, well, from what we're seeing, they kind of nailed it.
Yeah.
These reports show viewership actually went up from past Christmases, and people were watching from almost 200 countries.
Yeah, almost 300 million subscribers could watch those games. Pretty massive audience for a Wednesday night, even with Beyoncé, right?
Oh, absolutely. Speaking of, can we just talk about that halftime show for a sec?
Oh, man, that was something else.
Seriously, a 13-minute live performance by Beyoncé, plus Shabuzi and Post Malone just show up. I mean, she even came out on a white horse.
It's classic Beyoncé, right? Every performance, she gets more and more, I don't know, just bigger.
Totally. And pulling that off live on Netflix,
Yeah.
that's pushing their tech to the limit, for
Yeah.
sure. Kudos to her team, the whole production, everyone.
Definitely. But while we're gushing over Beyoncé, should we get to the actual football part?
Of course. So we had two really good games. The Kansas City Chiefs, they were already at 15-1, right? They played against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
And let's be honest, they crushed it.
Absolutely dominated. That win clinched them the #1 seed in the AFC, guarantees home field advantage throughout the playoffs.
Mahomes and Kelce were unstoppable that game, just like totally in sync.
No kidding. Then we had Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens against the Houston Texans.
Oh man, Lamar was on fire. 2 passing touchdowns, plus he ran one in himself.
He was incredible. Ravens won, which moved them into first place in the AFC North.
And can we give Derrick Henry a shout out? 147 rushing yards. The guy's a machine.
Yeah, even with all the hype around the halftime show, there was some serious football talent on display.
Big time. But to go back to something we mentioned earlier, the fact that the NFL even agreed to play on Christmas Day, a Wednesday no less, that's pretty huge.
It is. Shows they're really willing to, adapt to this new world of streaming
Yeah.
and cater to a global audience, too.
Totally. It's a major shift. The NFL almost never schedules games on Christmas.
Yeah, I think the last time they played on a Wednesday was back in 2020 because of
Yeah.
the pandemic, right?
Right. So this was all very deliberate to make that Netflix deal work. See if they could tap into a whole new audience.
It's a bold move.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how it plays out long term. But this is just one piece of a much bigger thing, like the whole streaming wars for live sports.
Exactly. You've got Amazon Prime with Thursday Night Football, YouTube TV got the Sunday Ticket, and now Netflix is jumping in. It's completely different from how it was just a few years ago.
And for people who might not know, that Sunday Ticket, it lets you watch any out-of-market Sunday afternoon game. It used to be just on cable, but now it's on YouTube TV.
It's so interesting to see how these streaming services are fighting over what used to be only on cable, right?
For sure. It really makes you wonder, what does all this mean for how we'll watch sports in the future?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Absolutely. But, hey, before we get too ahead of ourselves, maybe we should pause here for a sec. What are your thoughts on all this so far? When you think about it, there's a lot more to this Netflix deal than just, the games themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
This whole thing with people switching from cable to streaming, it's a big deal, right?
Absolutely.
And this Netflix deal, I mean, it could really change things. Big time.
Especially with all the money involved, right? I mean, we're talking about a $150 million deal here. That's serious cash.
Yeah, that's how you know the NFL's taking this seriously,
Yeah.
They're not messing around with streaming.
Right. And you got to figure it's not just because they like Netflix. All those cable subscriptions going down, younger people wanting to stream everything, the convenience of watching anywhere.
It all adds up.
But here's the thing I keep wondering about. Is this really a good thing for fans? Will everyone be able to afford all these streaming services? I mean, I like having options, but it's starting to feel like a lot, even for me.
It's a good point. I mean,
Okay.
think about it. What if you need a dozen different subscriptions just to watch all the games? And will that hurt viewership in the long run? And what about the people who can't afford to pay for all these services? These are all things the leagues and the streaming companies need to figure out.
It's like we're watching this big experiment play out in real time.
Totally.
Yeah.
And the experiment isn't even totally new, right?
Hmm.
Like the NFL playing on Christmas. It's happened before.
Right. But it's not common.
Not at all. I mean, they almost never do it. The last time was 2020 because of the pandemic, if I remember right.
Right. So this whole Wednesday, Christmas Day thing on Netflix, that was a choice, a big one.
Definitely. And a risky one, too. They're basically saying, we're all in on streaming now.
It's a big shift.
Huge. And it makes you wonder, who's next? What other streaming companies are going to try to get in on the sports action?
Right. Like, could you imagine Apple TV Plus with the Super Bowl someday?
Or Disney Plus doing Monday Night Football? I mean, it's not impossible.
It would be wild.
This whole Christmas Day thing, it might be just the beginning. Like, we might look back and say, that's when everything changed.
Maybe. But remember, Netflix has tried this before, right? They had that whole mess with the Mike Tyson fight.
Oh, yeah, true. But they also streamed that Packers-Eagles game earlier this season, and that went pretty smoothly.
Right. So they're learning as they go.
For sure. But they've got some serious competition. Amazon's been doing Thursday Night Football for a while now.
And people seem to like it.
Yeah, their coverage is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's YouTube TV with that Sunday ticket package now.
Which, by the way, for those who don't know, means you can watch any game you want on Sunday afternoon, even if it's not in your local area.
Huge deal. It was already a big deal when it was on DirecTV, but now it's even easier to get.
So yeah, it's a crowded field.
Definitely. And every streaming service is trying to do something different to stand out. Like Amazon has that X-ray thing where you can see all these stats and stuff.
Oh yeah, I like that.
And YouTube TV has multi-views, so you can watch a bunch of games at once.
And Netflix, well, they've got that global reach, right?
Mhm.
All those language options.
It's going to be interesting to see who comes out on top,
Yeah.
and whether it's actually good for the fans or not.
Yeah, because it's the thing, right? We still don't know who this is really benefiting. The companies, the leagues, or the fans.
Good question. And speaking of questions, here's another one. We've talked a lot about how people watch sports, but what about the actual viewing experience? Like, is streaming going to make it better or worse? What do you think?
That's a tough one, right? Like, will this actually make watching sports better for us, the fans? I mean, on the one hand, you've got way more options now. More flexibility, too. You can watch on your phone, your tablet, your TV. Doesn't matter where you are.
And don't forget about all the interactive stuff they're doing.
Oh, right.
Like real-time stats, different camera angles, ways to actually, like, participate in the game. That's pretty cool.
It is. But then there's the other side, right? Like we talked about before, the cost. Needing all these subscriptions, if you want to watch everything, you might end up paying even more than cable.
Yeah, that's a real concern. And then there's the question of, like, will the quality actually be good? Across all these platforms, I mean. We've all had those moments where the stream buffers or it lags.
Yeah.
Can they really handle it? Especially for those massive events like the Super Bowl.
And what about just, like, watching with other people, going to a bar with your friends, or watching with your family on Sunday? Will we lose that?
It's a good point. There's something special about those shared moments, The cheers, the groans, the whole experience.
It's hard to say what'll happen, really, but this Christmas Day thing, the NFL on Netflix, it definitely gives us a peek into the future. Streaming's going to be a big part of it. That much is clear. More choices, but also more challenges.
Definitely. And it's not just about the tech, right? The whole power dynamic is changing.
Yeah.
Between the leagues, the broadcasters, the fans.
Yeah, it's a whole new ballgame.
Absolutely. This deep dive has been really interesting, wouldn't you say? Like unpacking all of this.
Totally. We've covered a lot. The games themselves, all the behind-the-scenes stuff with the streaming, the money, and what this means for how we watch sports in the future.
I mean, we saw how Beyoncé basically stole the show, right? And how streaming's shaking things up big time. But we also talked about the tough questions like, will people be able to afford this? Will it be a good experience?
So many questions.
It's complicated, no doubt. But the main thing we've learned, the streaming revolution is here. It's happening. And it's changing everything about sports. This Christmas Day thing, it was just one example, but it feels like a sign of what's to come.
It does. So where do we go from here? What does all this mean for us, the fans? I guess we'll have to see. But it's a conversation we need to have, for sure.
Yeah.
What do you think? We want to know your take on this whole streaming thing. Hit us up on social media. Let us know. Is this a good thing? Are we going to end up missing out on something? We're really curious to hear your thoughts. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep exploring.